My name is AJ Peralta, and generously in the program it has me listed as the Chief Creative Officer for Icarus Studios, and probably more accurately, I run content and strategy. I would never want to take anything away from my creative directors. I'm a little bit more of a business guy than a creative guy. I'm going to pontificate for about 1 minute just to set the stage, and then I'll introduce our panel, and we'll go right into questions from there. But I really want to set the stage because most of what I've seen the last couple of days is really focused on, well, traditional and new media, but a lot about broadcast. And in all these panels that have talked about Web 2.0 or new media, I really haven't heard much mention of games, online multiplayer games, virtual worlds. So if you allow me, let me just set the stage for that. You know, the dominant media products of the 20th century were really defined by the intervening physical space between commercial art and its audience. I mean, picture this. With film and theater, the audience sat 50 feet from the screen. And then came the advent of television, and suddenly we were 10 feet sitting on our sofas with our friends and families. Then came the PC and the web, and suddenly we were 2 feet away from the monitor. Well, now we've entered a world where the player, the user, the consumer, is inside the game as an avatar. We are inside the media, and we're deeply engaged. According to the Entertainment Software Association of America, the average game player is 33 years old, and the average purchaser of games is 38 years old. Almost 25% of game players are over 50 years old. And half of all online gamers say they play games online 1 to 4 hours per week at a minimum. Now, most of you have always think, when you think about games, you think about guys who are wearing capes and elf boots and slaying dragons. But the important thing to understand is that 85% of all games that sold were rated E for everyone. Now, here's one of the most important statistics, and the one I love, and you know, of course, it's a little future look. But Gartner predicts by 2010, so we're talking not even 2 years from now, that gaming will be larger than movies, television, and the music industry combined. That's pretty impressive. So how is all this money being made? Are people buying packaged software, purchase downloads, subscriptions, advertising, sponsorships, product placement, virtual goods, prepaid cards? Yes, yes, most definitely yes. I mean, picture this, virtual goods in 2007, the estimates. Now, virtual goods, mind you, could be anything from a quarter JPEG you put on your screen in your virtual room to personalize that room all the way through a land purchase for thousands of dollars. That market in 2007 in US trade was $1 billion. And I know Andy has something to say about some of the black market in there, which is almost twice that. Now, this is a lot to take in. So today we're here to talk to you about kind of the future edge of that. Massively multiplayer online games and virtual worlds. Let me just a quick show of hands. Does anybody here have any hands-on playing in any of these worlds? Great. So everybody has kind of a general sense of what we're talking about when we're talking about these sorts of things. Perfect. Well, then without further ado, let me quickly introduce my panel. Immediately to my left is Matt Boswick. He's the SVP at MTV Networks. And Matt's been responsible for developing a lot of next-generation businesses for MTV. Now, while this has included many things, you know, I asked Matt to be here today because his team has launched, I think, at least 8 virtual worlds at this point, and recently won an Emmy Award for these worlds, which is pretty amazing. And of these worlds, some of them you've probably heard about. Virtual Laguna Beach, Pimp My Ride, The Hills. Some amazing product that's been tied in with on-air broadcasting. Next to him is Andrew Schneider, who's the founder and president of Live Gamer. Now, this is really interesting. Live Gamer is a company that provides a legitimate market for player-to-player trade of virtual goods. In a very short time, Live Gamer has been able to partner with a list of impressive game publishers, including Sony Online, Acclaim, Funcom, among quite a few others at this point. Sitting next to Andrew is Craig Sherman. He's the CEO of Gaia Online. Now, Gaia was founded in 2003 by a few comic book fans, but has grown to become, now, I've put quite a few things here, the world's largest, the fastest growing, virtual world for teens.
No need to edit, that's good.
We need to edit.
No,
but I will say what I think I know is that Gaia Online, as far as forums go, community-based forums, has the largest forums on the internet. That's pretty amazing. Sitting next to Craig is John Needham. He's the SVP of Operations for Sony Online Entertainment, where he's responsible for business development. Sony Online Entertainment is a, I guess, game development and publishing arm of Sony. And probably some of the best known games coming out of there are EverQuest 1 and 2, plus more and more a number of PlayStation titles. As we head on down the row, sitting there is Ed Moran. And Ed Moran is the Director of Product Innovation at Deloitte. And he and his team focus on advising their clients in the areas of strategic planning, innovation, positioning, and commercialization of how to enter these worlds or how to take their brand into these spaces. And then at the end, we have Rob Urich. He's the Senior Director of Digital Markets for Payment One. Now, Payment One is a leading online payment solutions provider. And where Rob's perfect in this space is among the many companies they work with, Payment One customers include World of Warcraft, probably right now the granddaddy of all massively multiplayer online games, Gaia, Habbo, Vivendi Games, and Acclaim, among many others. So let me start right now and ask you guys a question. We've all heard the buzz. Virtual worlds, massively multiplayer online games. Is there a difference? What's the difference? Matt, you had something to say a little bit earlier about that. What is the difference, if there is one?
I think I was talking to somebody before, and they could have argued with this definition, but I think any definition without somebody to argue with it. But I mean, the way we've kind of seen it develop is that MMOGs tend to be much more heavily to the object-based gaming. You got an objective and you're gaming towards it. So maybe 90% gaming-oriented, 10% social, and the social tends to be oriented and organized around the game objective, whereas virtuals tend to be much more open-ended and socially oriented, and a smaller part of it, gaming. Having said that, it's all kind of blended together at this point.
Fair enough. Anybody else want to touch on that? Do they see a difference between these two spaces? I know, Craig, you...
Yeah, I do. I think, and again, I like the way Matt put it. Anybody could debate this as a sort of, how do you frame a new industry that's evolving really quickly? But it's helpful to try to do that. And I think there is a new category. I think virtual worlds are distinct from, on the one hand, games, of which I would argue MMOGs are one form. Massively multiplayer online role-playing games are one form. And on the other hand, social networks. And they fall squarely in between them. So if I were to use a metaphor, I'd say social networks like Facebook are the 21st century version of the telephone. They're the tool you use to keep up with your real life friends about the real world. It's a tool. I think virtual worlds are the 21st century version of the mall or downtown, the place you go to hang out with your friends on the weekend or after school, and you do a dozen forms of very light level activities. Not hardcore activities like a game, and at the end of the day, when mom asks what'd you do, you say, oh, I just hung out with my friends. And then I think an MMORPG is the arcade at the mall, which you go into sometimes, and then you suck yourself back out afterwards, and you've lost some time and been really engaged in it. But it's a much more deep, immersive experience than the mall or downtown is. That's my attempt at trying to define the category.
Sure. Anybody else want to take a crack at that one, or we think we have a framework?
No, I think both of those definitions are really good, and the MMOGs, obviously what we spend a lot of time is developing canned content and guiding players through a game experience. I think the separation is really the amount of social networking you do, and truly in MMOGs these days it's all social networking around doing things in the game world. So, but again, I think things are moving together at this point, and a lot of the stuff that's working in virtual worlds we're incorporating in our MMOGs, and I think it's going the other way. A lot of the game experiences that we've developed are now bleeding into the virtual world space. So there's not going to be much difference in this next generation of online games.
Interesting. Now, I started out by talking a little bit about that grandiose scale of the numbers being made and the number of users. Do you guys seeing something similar with some of your platforms or your vision for the future, that games are here and they're big, and virtual worlds and MMOGs are hot on the tail of or on the front end of driving all of this?
I think there's no doubt about it, and I think the creative executions are appealing continually to the hardcore audience, but the demographics have been broadening out. And we also see a category that's emerged sort of in between the hardcore MMOs and the virtual worlds, sort of the Nexon Maple story, more of a 2D lightweight experience that does combine a lot of the elements of context that propels a community forward, but also provides a really rich social interaction. So from our perspective, working across the industry with all manner of different publishers who target different demographics, we see across the board people coming into these experiences.
I think that virtual worlds in particular, and what I'd try to call advanced casual games, like some of the ones from Nexon out of Korea, which are, to Andy's point, fabulously successful over here in Europe and in Asia. I think they're going to be really successful because I think they're a heck of a lot more accessible to the average human being than a very fantasy-based hardcore MMORPG is. They're not as hard to get into also, and they're not, once you're in them, you're not required to spend the same tens of hours in it that most human beings just can't. So, I mean, for reference, the best, most popular game out there, I shouldn't say best, but the most popular one in World of Warcraft has 7 million people using it. You know, there's 800 million teens in the world. It's not that big yet.
And to put it in perspective, you know, there's over, what, Min Kim likes to quote, over 100 million people in Korea playing Kart Rider, which is just an astounding phenomenon over in but it is yeah, there's like 45 million or so people in Korea, but I think that Andy's point's totally correct. It's something like 80% of their target, which are teens and into the 20s and 30s, play Kart Rider. I mean, it's crazy big, much bigger than a MySpace, experience in the States is relative to the population.
Rob, Payment One provides these solutions for let's say advanced casual, for Gaia, for Habbo, and for deeply immersive like World of Warcraft. Is the sort of growth that we're talking about stuff that you're seeing also?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think the numbers speak for themselves in terms of just the overall industry, in terms of hardware, software, subscription, one-time virtual goods being purchased. A couple different things there, I think, that are driving that, especially are just what the value, the entertainment value that games are really providing to the masses of folks right now. And I think that's a big thing in terms of time and value. Games are providing more value than maybe anything else right now that's out there. We see it. I think some of the game companies here, as they're seeing their users grow, we're seeing more transactions. So every month we're seeing more transactions from our customer base month after month.
Interesting.
And again, that's all premium services, be it either subscription recurring or just one-time purchases, $5, $10, $15, $20 at a time to purchase virtual assets down the road.
Yeah, and I work largely with enterprises, so it's interesting. I see the perspective of the growth in the enterprise side of the equation. And going back to the definitions, I mean, it's interesting. We talk about the definitions, and I think reasonable people would sit there and go, "What is the point of even creating this taxonomy of what kind of games?" But it's interesting because if we were talking to Fortune 100 folks and we were saying, "These are the kind of things you can do with your brand in a virtual world," they're all ears. If you say video gaming, or if you talk about kind of Dungeons and Dragons, kind of role playing, right away you turn them off. And there really needs to be, I think, that kind of continuum of where you shift from one to the other, because from the enterprise, they're still getting comfortable with the idea of a community, virtual communities, and gee, what happens when I let my user interact with my brand and I can't control all of it? And if you then introduce the thought of a game as well, it's very, very difficult to have people who have never worked in that area accept that and adopt that as, gee, this is something I need to incorporate into my business. So I think it's very important. And when I talk about virtual worlds, tremendous interest. If I talk about gaming with my clients, then it's much more of, well, I'm not a media and entertainment company. If I were a media and entertainment company, I understand how I can increase the value of my different franchises by adding a gaming component. I don't really see it. So I think the terminology really is key when talking about the growth we see. Gaming, media, entertainment, love it. If you really want to talk about virtual worlds, you need to talk about it in those terms with the enterprise, because at this point in the adoption, the Fortune 100 is comfortable with virtual communities and not comfortable when gaming and the role-playing start coming in.
I think that's a very, very good point. One thing I've noticed in our business, we provide a white label. We build turnkey worlds and games for media companies, but we've now split into two divisions. One is media and entertainment companies, but the other piece of it is serious games, which is for corporate and government solutions. And people go, well, is there really a business there? But the only thing you really have to think about is the flight simulator. And has the flight simulator made it safer to fly airplanes? And the answer is absolutely yes. So there is that sort of division. Well, we started down this path of talking a little bit about revenues, and we just hinted at it, but let's kind of dive right into it. I threw out a lot of many different ways of where revenues are made. Craig, let me ask you, Gaia, what is the mix right now in terms of where revenues are coming in? What excites you?
It's about 80-20 virtual goods and on the one hand, or microtransactions on the one hand, and 20% sponsorship. So both are interesting for totally different reasons. And I think intellectually it's the coolest thing, the idea that people are paying for pixels, right? And financially it's cool because we have like 94% gross margins on our business. When we sell one, it doesn't cost us much variable cost to hand one to somebody. And then from a more social point of view, how cool it is. If you spend $1 or $2 in our world, you can have a radically cooler experience, social experience. You're spending an hour a day every day on the site versus buying a couple candy bars in the real world. I don't know. It's actually an extraordinarily good value for the money. And not just in our world at all. I think this is a general point about all the virtual worlds, and people like Andy are being smart and taking advantage of the general category and building out tools for all of us. Sponsorship side, I think, is really interesting, on the other hand, because unlike buying if you're a brand and you're trying to connect with consumers, most of the ways you have to do it are buying an interrupt form of advertising, whether it's on television that people don't want to watch, or it's in a magazine, and unless you're a clothing designer in Vogue, it's hard, advertising in Vogue, it's very hard to get the average consumer interested in seeing your ad. It's there, not by their request. In our world and in most of the virtual worlds, I think there's the potential to make extraordinary brand connections between the experience with the user, where the user gets something out of it and the brand gets something out of it. So I'll give one example, sorry. So Nancy Drew, the movie, they advertised on our site. They advertised on Yahoo. They advertised on MySpace. Front page of Yahoo. We drove more traffic by far than either MySpace or Yahoo, despite them spending a ton more money. Why? Because on those sites, they put up a banner. Who's going to click on it? On our site, Nancy Drew can appear, and she has her own profile and a storyline behind her, and she can invite you to a theater, and you can watch the trailer and background with other people in a shared experience. It's fun because you can make fun of the movie or talk about what you like about the movie, or then connect in forums with people with the same connections. And then if you watch it and do a set of things and pass a quiz, you get a virtual item, a sleuth kit with a magnifying glass that has functionality in the world. Things are larger with it. Or you can hold on to it and trade it in the marketplace after the campaign's over, and it's worth more. So one tiny concrete example, and I think that can be done in any of the virtual world experiences, not just Gaia.
I think MTV has also had some amazing success with sponsorships in some of your worlds and kind of leading the way. Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think we're just a flip from you guys just for monetization. I mean, probably 90% of our revenue is coming in. I think we've had 15 major sponsors, in at this point. And, I think one of the distinctions I like to make in a kind of simple-minded way is this isn't just watching, it's living it. And going back to the previous question, which is what's the shift? I mean, you're going from, when I was growing up, it was, Palm. I'm dating myself. And then the next generation had video console games. And now the kids, but it started at some point in their development. Now kids are growing out. Literally, my 5-year-old is playing, WebKids. Like from the time that she even is a little baby, is going online and playing, living in these interactive experiences. So, that's why I call it this next generation, the avatar generation. They are living their entire lives, online, and I think the avatar is interesting. If MySpace page is just like you said, like the mall or the phone book. I'm creating myself online. When you create an avatar, you're creating yourself. You're no longer representing yourself as a web page. You're literally creating an object that represents you, and you're going and living, 24/7. So, if you buy that whole notion that this distinction between real and virtual is completely dissolving, for this generation, then the model's different. And fundamentally the model is the real value in world of marketing is created not by advertising, which stops at the eyes and ears, but it's exactly what Craig was saying, is when they take it in and start bring that brand in and make it part of their lifestyle, which is exactly what happens out in the real world and how real people interact with brands. So that's really the model, that we've been focusing on, building out with our brands. And we've seen, just at this point, billions of points of data that just really validate. If you do it right, it can completely flip the model from pushing out messages and bombarding people with stuff to giving them a choice to interact with and go very deep with the brand.
Interesting. Yeah, we touched a little bit on, we started on virtual goods, and I just wanted to follow that through because I know Andy's company right now is just going through integration for Sony Exchange, and I'd love for you guys to talk a little bit about, there's one hand where the platform or the game can sell a virtual good to a player or a user, but then there's this whole secondary market where users sell goods to each other.
Yeah, and this actually started nearly a decade ago in the 1999 area around EverQuest and Ultima Online and some of the very early MMOGs. And I had read a press release that was issued in 1999 where an Ultima Online character sold on eBay for $3,000. That was nearly a decade ago. And that market continued to grow. And people started capitalizing on that, playing the games strictly to make money on the games. And it grew to what is reported to be a $1.8 billion worldwide market of virtual items for real money here in the US as well as in places like Korea and Asia. So, this is a huge economy, but unfortunately it was sort of in the black market. Publishers initially did not embrace this type of behavior. It was a violation of their terms of service and end user license agreements. They weren't participating in any of that revenue. Yet they were incurring customer support costs. It was bad for players. They were being scammed. There was, fraud rampant. So we decided at Live Gamer to create a legitimate marketplace, and we've partnered with Sony Online, who actually pioneered a legitimate secondary marketplace several years ago by launching the Station Exchange against EverQuest 2. And we recently announced that we would be integrating their technology with some of our homegrown technology from folks who build trading platforms on Wall Street.
Yeah, so we've been looking for years for a good, legitimate solution like Live Gamer, because in our games, this black market's been a real problem for our subscriber base. You've got guys who do certain exploits in our game. They interrupt other gamers' experience because they're grinding for gold and items, and they're blocking access to content. And so for a long time, we've been looking for a third party to come in and kind of clean up the space. IG has dominated the black market for a long time. They don't have the best reputation in the world, and so we've been looking for a company like Live Gamer to support and legitimatize this whole space and clean it up. So clean out the gold farmers as much as we can, clean up the fraud that happens, because the highest incident of fraud right now are these gold farming companies who take payment and personal information from our players, right, who buy gold from them. They turn around and they'll open another 100 accounts with us for their gold farmers to go in and farm more gold.
John, can you quickly explain what gold farming is?
So gold farming is, there'll be shops in China, say, that will have hundreds of players in the game, playing the game repeatedly over and over, 12 hours a day, taking all that currency, throwing it onto another avatar's account, and then selling it for real world money to our players. And then our players buy it and they turn around and they buy virtual goods with it in the game. So it's been a real problem for us, and the fraud rate recently has just gone through the roof with all these aggressive gold farming practices of taking personal information, creating all these fraudulent accounts. So we're just ecstatic to have Andy here to help us clean it up.
Ed, as you talk to clients, you say you work with a lot of corporate clients, and some of that may be in serious games, but specifically in the entertainment arena, what sort of advice do you give them when there's so many choices of getting involved with another platform, building their own, all these revenue models?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately it's driven again by what are they trying to do, and going back to the interaction with the brand, that typically, unless it's a media and entertainment company that might have an entertainment product they want to sell or incorporate. Assume it's another sort of company. It's really all about, again, having people interact with the brand and do all kinds of wonderful things. That it's not just about brand building. It might be about innovation of new products, new features around products. I mean, it's amazing what can come out of an interaction with a company, an interaction with their products. It might also be things like customer support, where you actually have folks who then help one another reduce customer support that has to be done by the corporation. So we've done all kinds of case studies and modeling of this, and I think that and I'm paid to be a cynic because the company hires me to come in here and look at it. So I take a very, very jaundiced view of a lot of this, but what I think is useful is we talk about revenue. Revenue is definitely ramping. There's all kinds of interesting stuff taking place in that front. But I think a great question to ask the company that's thinking about doing this is saying, forget a moment about kind of the examples that exist now. Think about the other underlying trends that might be driving this kind of behavior, and it might make either the gaming side of it or the virtual world side of it big. And you look at social networking, which I think we all agree there's a huge social networking component to this. If you look at social networking, if you look at the rise of the PC is really the most important media device for many people. They consume everything now through their PC. It's really eclipsed television to some extent. When you look at the amount of time that they're spending on it, when you look at how gaming has become mainstream, if you look at kind of those 4 pillars, it's a no-brainer that your business needs to move in this direction. Okay, you have to be there. It's just a matter of figuring out how. And you're right, looking at the platforms, looking at payment methods and all of that, that is really terra incognita for most enterprises, because they have no idea how do you do this. All right, is this something that we build internally? Who do we put on the committee that puts this together? Do we have lawyers there? Do we have marketers there? Do we have all of them there? Do we have the IT guys there? Do we build this ourselves? Do we go outside? So it's a tremendous thorny set of questions. I guess just very quickly, you want to have everyone there, because every part of your company is going to touch and be touched in these communities. So you really want to have your legal, your marketing, people who are responsible for the brand, people who are responsible for external communication, because there's external communication that's taking place. It's really complex. I mean, this is not something you just cut and paste onto your organization and say, okay, my digital group will handle that. It's really something that's
A lot of legal.
A lot of legal. I think you bring up an excellent point, for some of the audience who may be representing their companies or have original IP going, okay, where do I get started? Matt, I think maybe if you wouldn't mind touching upon, there are so many departments. What troops do you rally, and how do you rally the troops to get people to buy in to some of this really advanced media?
I think, there's a product life cycle for this, just like there is for anything. And I differ a little bit in terms of the start. I think getting a huge committee together of all the parties you just basically is a guarantee for a mediocre product that it'll take forever to get launched. That when you're starting up, that it should be a small group of passionate, dedicated people that have support at very, very high levels. Hopefully at the C level, at least in the company. And you said get out there and you got a mission, make sure you got a creative vision for it, but get in there and start trying something, because it's not this thing where you create this great big thing and you launch it and then it's like launching a TV show. It just kind of sits there. You don't know until you actually try it what the interaction between your audience and your brand is going to be. So it's better to get out there and start interacting versus sitting in a conference room forever and thinking about it.
Sure. Makes
Yeah,
sense.
I completely agree. I think so much of this is about testing and finding out actually what building something, or testing something on somebody's site, finding what happens, and then reacting to the data. How did your consumers or customers react? Was it what you were looking for or not? If not, how do you shift it? And that's the beauty of the net and of the virtual world space, as opposed to a piece of software game in a box, is that you can actually experiment. I think a lot of the people who did stuff, for example, in Second Life, learned a tremendous amount, even if it wasn't quote-unquote successful on its first time. I think you learn a ton from it. You guys have done a tremendous amount of experimenting and through the process. Yeah. And I think you guys get better and better and better over time because you try so many different things.
Yeah, eventually you figure something out, it works, and then that's the point at which you want to scale it. And now we're at that point where we're really bringing everybody into this in our company because we want to get it integrated with everything else that comes.
But it takes somebody of Matt's stature inside the company who's actually can push something through that, frankly, for most people over 40 in the company don't get. It's true, right? I mean, you have battles internally and had to push to get something.
Yes.
Once you do it and they believe in it, then it's their idea too.
And frankly, that's to me the biggest place where they fail. It's that you didn't have the right support level for a sustained period. So iteration 1 and iteration 2 didn't work, and you're getting close with iteration 3, and now support's gone. You kind of burned through your budget, and you're done, and you never had the 40-plus-year-olds at the table understanding kind of what did success look like. That's tough too.
That's where you need a senior. That's where you need a C-level who kind of feels it. It's going to give you enough latitude to run at it. But I don't think that support's going to come from a committee.
John, while your group, while Sony Online is charged with the game creation and it's this incredible group, I'm sure you must also reach out and have to interact with the film and the television arms and the hardware arms of Sony. How is that? I mean, running along the same line, your experiences with trying to, rally the team in these cross-functional departments.
Yeah, well, we really haven't built a game that's besides Star Wars, I guess. Galaxies, that's based on a popular movie property, but and most of our interactions are surprisingly with third parties, because when you work in a big company like Sony, the hardest deal to get done is the internal deal. So, it's interesting trying to adapt the media to the gaming space and some of the issues that you run into doing that. But I don't think it's typical for it's anything different from doing a standalone console game. So it's just all again how you face the brand in the game world and what players can actually do in that world and what they can't do.
Sure.
So that's what we balance all the time.
I know everybody's going to have a little bit of a different experience, but I wanted to ask that question for people who don't know. The question is, how long, if you're starting at zero, how long does it take to make one of these worlds or one of these online games? And I know it's this long, but if each of you could just touch on your experience of what you've seen.
For a core MMO, and we're doing cross-platform MMOs now that are PC and PS3, it's probably a minimum of 3.5 to 4 years. But I think it's much different from what
Well, in
these guys are doing.
contrast, the project we did together with MTV, 3 months start to finish, and it was darn successful, right?
Tell us what that was.
So so Matt wanted to experiment. So all of the properties until last November that Matt's team has had built are 3D downloadable spaces, really, really good quality. So if you've used Second Life and don't like it, worth going to check out some of the stuff that MTV's done, because it's actually even better fidelity. It's pretty terrific stuff. At any rate, they decided to experiment with us, and what we have is a Japanese anime-inspired isometric, so like sort of 2.5D look feel to it, but it's non-downloadable. It's in Flash, all on purpose. We actually build things in 3D and re-render them in 2D so that they're accessible to people. So we built a world for the Hills, which you guys had already built one, and it's successful already in 3D. So we built like a second world inside it, but this was inside the world of Gaia. It wasn't sort of private labeled and separate. It was inside a world where the teens already were. We have over 5 million teens in our site, 500,000 a day inside the site. So, so we launched that together, but we really collaborated, where we took our art style sensibility and tried to match that and adjust it together with the creative team at Sony. And in short, we drove tremendous amount of, I don't want to show all the statistics, but they were quite good, right?
Yeah, quite good.
Much more traffic than the 3D space.
Embarrassed our 3D space a little bit.
Yeah. So, but from your point of view, it's like, hey, you learned another thing works. You're agnostic to
I'm
the.
not 3D, 2D, whatever D. It's about bringing people in and keeping them. Right at the end of the day, and what I love about this thing is I think we've created a much better front door. I think Gaia is our it battles for MTV.com for being our #1 referring site to our 3D space.
Is that cool? For all of MTV.com, we end up driving as much or more traffic through our space.
Well, it goes back to this experimentation thing too, because if I had gone to the brand people that run and said, look at Gaia, said we want to do that creative style, they'd say no, not for our brand. It's way too juvenile looking, little tiny midgets, blah blah blah. And so we just kind of did it, and then we came back and showed our sponsor recently, our stuff, and he looked at the, he's an MTV old creative guy, so he looked at the stuff and winced a little bit, and then we told him the numbers. He said, yeah, don't argue with the audience.
Right. That's the audience chose it, right? And that's true of all of the social experiences out there, right? Why is Orkut really popular in 2 or 3 countries and not in others? Or Friendster hugely popular in the Philippines, which is not. I think you build something, and to a large degree, the audience and the culture reacts to it. In our case, we have something that resonates with teens.
Let's riff on that a little bit. We've talked a little bit about, we keep saying the audience, and the average game player is about 33 years old. But really, what is this market, and how does it break down? And who are these users? Are they kids? Are they teens? Are they 20-somethings, 30-somethings? I just want to open up whoever, each take a turn and dive in. And who do you think that audience is, and where is that audience growing?
Yeah, I think in the MMO space, traditionally it's been that core gamer 18 to 34, right? But there are a lot of services coming out that are really validating the teen tween space. So RuneScape is one. You got Gaia, Club Penguins, who's even younger, and they're all building just great businesses in that space. Which, if you would have asked us 5-6 years ago, we would have said there's no money there because kids don't have credit cards, right? So, as the business model's evolved and you've got direct virtual item sales, no subscription required, you've got all these payment methods like PayPal, right? And you've got wallet systems where parents can basically deposit an online allowance for their kids so they can control their spend in the games. It's really kind of broadened out the whole space, I think. And at SOE, we've got a game coming out later this year called Free Realms that goes directly at that teen tween space. We were inspired by what RuneScape built, and we built our own game that's a full 3D game. Doesn't play in a browser, but it's very low spec, and it's not going to be a subscription-based game like what we've done before. And it's going to be lighter and targeted at that teen tween audience, and I'm pretty excited to see what we do with it.
Great. Rob, I was going to ask you, how does Payment One help teens and kids part with their money, their folks' money?
Yes.
In a safe way.
Yeah, in a safe way. You're right, exactly. Well, a couple things too I just wanted to say. I think one of the exciting and interesting things too is that there's really several things for everyone now. Across many different demographics, etc. There's multiple great options for people to be playing now, which really opens up the entire market. Where casual games continue to grow too. We haven't talked about that, but companies like emergence like Club Pogo subscription or buy one at a time, those are growing also. In terms of kind of where we operate, as an alternative to credit cards, and not just us. I mean, we are seeing some trends, and there's multiple alternatives to credit cards now. Obviously, we build a local phone DSL bill here in the U.S. We see prepaid being a growing option. We're doing some interesting things in terms of you get somebody prepaid, and then you're maybe getting them into a different payment method down the road. And again, one thing I'll just say too, that a lot of these companies are having to look at is really looking at it. It is a global marketplace that they'll all agree at, and you really need to. Well, unfortunately, the holy grail of having one payment processor isn't there yet. Most companies will find they'll need 2, 3, maybe 4, based on where they are operating throughout the world. And then you really got to look at what options are in that country based on what your target is. In terms of 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 options now per country.
Good point. You mentioned prepaid. Craig, I know Guy Online has had some, I think, fantastic success with prepaid cards. Could you kind of explain that? And
yeah,
'cause it's not
but
typical.
I would say first we've had terrific success with Rob's company as well. So we introduced this concept you can pay by your phone, your home phone bill. It turns out a lot of people want to do that. 'Cause basically, the issue is kids all have the money. Kids have money, and in our case, teens, 13 to 22, that's our core base. They have the money. They don't have the payment mechanism usually. In Europe, it's really easy. You just do cell phone. Here, it isn't. So we introduced a prepaid cash card that looks like an iTunes card that you'd buy in retail, and we tested it with. We just tested it with Target. So actually, I'm not publicly sharing the stats on it. But let me say that our business is roughly twice as big as a result of this than it was 2 months ago when we introduced it. People just needed a way to get us the money, it turned out. And so it really unleashed the business. And in the space, they're trying, I guess 5 or 6 different companies are testing cards. And one other is doing very well. That's Maple Story from Nexon, the Korean company. And then the rest are about 1/5 the size of the 2 of us. So they didn't really take off. But the concept works if you have a product that people resonate with and respond to. So people buy it for $25, and then they buy in increments of whatever they want on the site, decrementing off of this card.
What is the average price of something on Guy Online? How does somebody?
They go from 10 cents to $9.99 for virtual items on the site. So 10 cents might be a cheap pair of shorts, and $9.99 might be a really cool evolving item that you buy when it's an egg, and over time, every week, it changes and grows into something cooler. So it eventually turns into a unicorn or something really cool like that, and then maybe it goes around the site and finds gold for you, and does something like that in more of a pet kind of concept. So.
Interesting. Rob, can Payment One, I mean, this is, I think, when we look at a platform as we work with our clients, trying to find this blended, is it virtual goods, is it free to play, then subscriptions? And I keep looking at different methodologies to try to find ways for payment. Thought about the mobile companies, and wouldn't it be great to short code? But the mobile companies, the carriers, take 50% of that transaction right off the top. So for a dollar good, it's basically impossible. Nobody gets paid. When does this break? When does a 10-cent good make sense that you can clear? I mean, I'm asking the question strangely.
It does not. Currently does not. So so we're not involved in, per se, micro payments. That term's been thrown out a lot over the years, and for at least for us, it doesn't exist yet. Just some of the minimum transaction processing costs just don't support that. So typically, we will process a charge, kind of a bulk charge of $5, $10, $15, maybe $20 on one-time virtual asset purchase, and then our merchant then would manage, okay, it's a 25-cent this or $1 this. So
a debit card sort of approach.
No, but practically speaking, for the consumer, they feel like they're getting to buy in bite-sized pieces. What in practice they do is get billed once, like your iTunes thing during the month, for the collection of it, or you bought $25 up front, but you don't think of it that way, interestingly. So, and I think this microtransaction, I think you're right in how you just precisely described why it's not exactly a microtransaction, and yet the consumer behavior's reality is it feels very microtransaction-like, and it's growing incredibly fast, not just in the U.S., but obviously much faster and much more advanced in Asia than it is here. So, there's companies doing 10 cent. QQ does over 60 million a quarter in microtransaction virtual items, virtual services in China. It's a $7 billion plus market cap company. That's real. And you've got in Korea, you've got Cyworld that does 300 million in virtual goods that are all microtransactions. So they're very real numbers. Habbo Hotel is doing over 80 million, euro.
Just to kind of talk about subscriptions, the traditional model MMOs. From what I've read for World of Warcraft, that World of Warcraft is the single largest revenue contributing factor to Vivendi Universal's bottom line at about $1.5 billion a year, which is pretty amazing, and that's primarily through subscriptions, $15 per month. Andy, maybe a little early in the game, but where do you think these transactions are going to fit? Are they dollar transactions, $10 transactions, 50 cent?
Well, for Live Gamer, I mean, our model is, of course, we're providing marketplace service, so we're a transaction fee-based company, and our initial business model is to look at purchases of $10 or more at 10% of the gross settlement price of the item, and underneath $10, it's 99-cent flat, primarily due to the fact that there are processing fees there, but we're allowing, just to be clear, people to buy virtual items and sell virtual items for real money. So there's actually that ability to sell it and get cash out via PayPal.
Via PayPal. So when somebody uses your service, even though they may have an account at one of the platforms, they would actually register with your service also, and for security's sake, give them.
For security's sake, yeah, but we make that very seamless as possible, and clearly we're integrating with the publisher's consent, so we get to create a really nice seamless experience.
Interesting. One of there's three things I keep hearing recurring here, which is kind of the classic web promise early in the days, which were the 3 C's: content, community, and commerce. And I think even more so now, this is actually really starting to resonate, because the notion of community and Web 2.0 and social networks, the age of the avatars, I think, as Matt has pointed out, is that an even balance, content, community, and commerce? Or when you look at your worlds, Matt or Craig or any of the other gentlemen, where is that balance between content, community, and commerce?
From our end of it, we lead with content. So we're content production, we're a content creating company, and community builds around content, and commerce follows. And that's kind of how my simple-minded way I see it. You got to start. You got to start with content.
With content, would everybody agree that it starts with content?
Absolutely.
I'm sorry, John?
Yes.
Absolutely.
We spend a lot of money on content.
If I were to just, for the sake of trying to point out something that makes the virtual world so radically different from your games, that we actually rely on most of our content from our users. we create an art and a look and a feel like Disney World does when you go to Disney World. They have a great experience, but ultimately you had fun because you were with your family, and all the other stuff was something you riffed off to have communication and connection with family. We create a lot of tools on our site, but the users do most of the stuff on the site to create value. So I don't know if you call that community or it's just user-generated content, but it's important because as that distinction means we don't have to charge $15 a month for a subscription, and that means that we can have a lot more users. And I think to a certain degree, any game that like the one you're coming out with for teens and tweens will also have, I'm assuming, a level of extra social experience that you didn't make as forefront with a harder core game.
Yeah, really the way we're tackling that is we'll integrate with the Facebooks of the world.
Perfect. Cool.
Features from Free Realms, and it's not a subscription required game, and that's mostly to keep accessibility high.
Yeah.
It's got a very small client. It's 2 megabytes, and you're in the game. So kids can email it to their friends, and that viral distribution model I think is going to be really powerful in making Free Realms a success.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even with clients that aren't content companies, like a lot of the companies up here on the panel, they all rely on content to attract and retain people. Maybe it's content as simple as people talking about a product and offering how I can get the product to work better, or how get over a problem. That kind of content is created by the user, obviously, and becomes very, very important to get those people to keep coming back to it. So content clearly drives it. Then the community, it's hard to extricate that from it because that's what's creating the content in a lot of ways. If you didn't have the community, you wouldn't have the people coming back and trying to help one another and contribute, collaborate.
What's kind of cool about Andy's company, it's a really clever model. You could let companies like us, we actually built somewhat of, but just very simply put, we don't have to as a company, or companies like us don't have to work as hard on the commerce side if a company like you is there. Because you can do that and marry that with us focusing on content and community. It's pretty darn clever. Plus, you create a form of community, right? Transactions between people create a community.
So it becomes a meta game on top of the world or the game itself.
Yeah. When eBay says they have an eBay community, that's what they mean, right?
Absolutely. We have, I believe, about 10 minutes left. Let me, with everybody in the panel, open up if there are any questions. There's such a range of topics here that, please, yes?
Hi. The market sustain has many keywords and it's like we have Gaia, we have Minion, we have Stardoll, we have Bear, we have Pago, and probably many more than that. The market sustain all of these, and new ones are getting created every week for different demographics. Can the market sustain them?
So can the market
So
sustain all this
I'd say the
program?
answer is no. Clearly, it's not going to be possible for an infinite number of these to start coming out over time, and more are getting built. But I actually think the big lesson is less that and more that consumer behavior is changing and virtual worlds are going to be huge. And it'd be like if 40 years ago you were asked the question, what's going to be big, Scrabble or or Monopoly? And the right question would have been no. This new thing called board games has been created, and it's a huge change in people's leisure time behavior. They weren't there before, they are now. That's the really interesting change that's happening. And then within it, which are the ones that win is almost a lesser question. Unless, of course, you're starting one, in which case I think it's incredibly challenging if you're starting one right now. You have to have a lot of things aligned because the market's already getting really crowded. There's probably 50 Club Penguin killer companies funded right now.
Particularly kids' space, yeah.
I don't know. Isn't it like asking in 1960, we have too many TV shows, in the era of 3 channels.
Right.
And now it's like, I don't know if we probably had, between the 3 networks, we probably had, 40 TV shows, all sitcoms, variety shows. And now how many TV shows are there? Just how many bloody channels are there? So I don't know. It just seems like the market will, the more content there is and the more variety it is, the bigger the market's going to be.
Well, one of the differentiators as well is that in our business, you can really only play one MMO at a time because they're so time intensive. It's not really true in Gaia and some of the more casual virtual world
More like
experiences.
TV.
So,
Yeah.
and I still think there's a ton of growth in that space. It's just there are a lot of games coming out this next year.
Particularly among kids, there's a lot of, I mean,
A
kids
lot of them.
games, there's probably 24. In fact, we look at it the same way. There's the traditional movie model, if you look at a metaphor, which are often very large and very big and kind of like an MMO, it's fantastic, but then there's a television model where, you know, we're personally within my company trying to deliver lighter weight, faster to market products and then serialize them as they go along and taking some of the best of what MMOs have done, which is to add-on packs and expansion packs and really kind of build it around a serialized model so we can get into the market faster with our clients and then keep adding to it.
And there is another big area of growth too, and that's on console.
Console. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is the state of the state with regards to safety around the virtual worlds? I mean, I was listening to one of the earlier presentations today, I think it's with Club Penguin, they limit, they can't have more than 2 digits. But I mean, really, you know, what is the state of the state? I mean, are virtual worlds being, you know, rapidly infiltrated by pedophiles and so forth? Is it a pretty safe environment? What are you finding? And what measures are being taken to protect the virtual worlds, even those that don't target, say, the child as the participant, but the ones that are targeting teens and above?
I mean, we're doing a lot of things with free roams as far as name filters, and obviously we're going to have tons of moderation in the world using our customer service people, right, to monitor chat to a level that we've never done before. And there are things that, you know, Toontown has done a really good job with cam chat, where you can control communications in a game to a certain extent and unlock it with parental approval, right? So we're building out, I think, a much more robust parental control system than we've ever had, because it's got to be safe. I mean, if it's not safe as a business, you're dead. So, so there's a lot of things you can do, I think, to make it as safe as possible.
Yeah, I think we're in a sort of a post that MySpace huge scare world where, meaning in 2 ways. One, I think all the publishers are extraordinarily cognizant that this could be the thing that kills them, so they're going to be really careful. We're certainly one of those, and we do, you know, could go through a list of dozens of things we do and others do in the space to protect themselves, and in other words, protect their users, right? But the second part of the post-MySpace experience is that kids are a heck of a lot more savvy than most of us give them credit for. And you see any good detailed research or focus groups where they ping kids in, they know who they're talking to. I mean, I can't go on my site without somebody immediately saying, "You sound like my dad." Seriously, you know, and it's my job, and I'm trying to figure out and talk to my users, and I can't get the exact language and type.
But you know, it's interesting when you see like the TV shows like To Catch a Predator, where there's been
Where it's sensationalized,
you know,
yeah.
success at, you know, unfortunate success at people perpetrating basically a fictitious representation. You know, I just wonder how hard is that going? You know, how hard is that to make that occur inside one of these virtual
The
worlds?
fact is, it's the net. People can make a MySpace. You can make a MySpace page put up a picture of a woman right now, or you can make a a virtual character in any virtual space or game, and you can pretend to be somebody you aren't.
You know, I guess what I'd throw out is UGS, user-generated security. You know, that if you look at New York, which wasn't a very safe place 20 years ago, you know, whatever you think of the politics of it, you know, what they fundamentally did was take cops and put them out into the community and connect with local people. And I think enabling a community, exactly, so they know who the people are that are weird and don't belong there. Just like in your neighborhood, you know if somebody doesn't belong there or not. So engaging the community and equipping them with tools to say this person isn't right and moderating them. And to me, that's
Yeah, I wouldn't downplay it. It's a serious issue. It's an incredibly serious issue, but it's also, I feel like it's gotten beyond that sensationalism of those types of TV shows. You know, when I joined Gaia, which was only about 18 months ago, I actually talked to some people in law enforcement before joining. I was like trying to figure out, if I go jump into this, what are the chances, you know, what bad could happen across all the different things. So I'm looking at every element from finance to people, et cetera. And then, you know, you talk to people who actually do this for a living in law enforcement or the FBI. They're like, hey, it's the net. That's the new world. Okay? It's not the site's fault. Now, let's go after the evil people out in the world. They're out there. And they do go to all the sites out there, MySpace, etc., and they ask for information and go after people and put them in jail, and etc.
I think the community will moderate itself, but there are things you can do, like in our chat moderation and watching our chat, you can put certain keywords in that when they pop up in chat, right, there's a report that spits out, like boyfriend or girlfriend or things like that, where you might have something inappropriate going on with kids. I just think with kids moderating their own community, you're running a much higher risk.
The scarier thing is if you're running an under 13 site.
Yes.
That's where it gets extremely difficult because there's no way to really know if they're under 13, right? What age they are. They can lie about their age, etc., come into your site, and at any rate, you got a 10-year-old on the site. If you don't force complete moderation where there's no ability for the person to just be able to say anything to somebody, it's risky.
To be back, I wasn't suggesting that kids moderate. It's more like, let's go back to community policing model in New York. It was, you still have the cops, you still have the professionals out there, but the community gave them the intelligence about who the bad guys were. And, I think that's the point is, Craig's point is, they know, from the language that people use and how they behave, who the bad guys are, or they have a higher propensity to know that than probably even the moderators. And the moderators, if you're a successful world, you've got thousands of people in there. You can't possibly scale a moderator solution where they're looking over every conversation and figuring out what's going on. So.
Take one more question. I know that you had your hand in the back there.
Thanks. I'm very interested in the crossover between the virtual and real worlds. So if we could take a little bit about how user content is going to come into these virtual worlds, how our real world is going to become a little bit more like augmented reality. What are those trends that are going to happen more going forward? In Majestic lived and died a very short life. What's going to be happening going forward as we see these worlds converging more and more in the respective way that you're seeing? So what are the trends that you see happening with that, going one way and the other?
I'll just one-liner that in our world, it's amazing how much of a mix there is. Same kid at one moment is fantasizing, pretending to be a knight in the forest, and one moment is talking about his dad just walked out on his mom and how pissed he is and what he's going to do about it. And it's all happening inside the same space, and there's no boundary. It's fascinating.
Matt, I think I've heard you say anybody under 25 years old, there is no difference between real and virtual.
Yeah, we did. We did research. We were trying to, is virtual the right word to call this thing? And we talked to really heavy users, and they were kind of offended by the word virtual because they said that sounds like it's fake. This is as real as anything else I do.
Yeah, I call them online hangouts, not virtual worlds, because I think that sounds science fiction or Second Life-like and limiting.
Can you repeat that? What did you just say?
Online hangouts.
Online hangouts.
Wait, we can actually probably squeeze one more little question in.
You actually do have time. You caught me by surprise. You have more time than you thought you did.
What? There was a question. Yes, sir?
Yeah, this is really cost based in terms of people out there might be thinking about starting up a game studio or virtual world. Can you give some flavor to the cost and what you have to do to sort of get to the point where you've got a virtual world, you've got a game studio, you've got online games?
We spent about $35 million so far, and about $25 million ongoing annual basis to build and update and maintain our space right now, and that's growing. So that gives you a sense. If somebody wants to do something in our space, they can do it for an extraordinarily low price. Put $100,000, $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 and create a world within our world very easily. But to start from scratch, I think it's kind of expensive.
It is. I can say that for serious games we were touching before, for some of our corporate clients, it's typically the first engagement's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And out of a $20 or $30 million Fortune 100 learning budget, it's not that big a deal. But for entertainment properties, typically what we're seeing right now for our budgets, and this is also a model we're looking at, is probably $1 to $5 million at a minimum. Again, World of Warcraft, when they first got off the ground, I think there was a $90 million commitment, and then since then they've spent, I think, $200 or $300 million. But you're probably at a minimum in the low millions to get into the.
For your casual game, what's it look like?
To launch will probably be about 20, 25 million in, and that's with marketing and infrastructure and development and everything.
Yes, ma'am?
Are virtual worlds more of a gaming and entertainment phenomenon, or do you actually see businesses, just B2B businesses, that are moving towards down the road, everybody does this.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Actually, we were talking about incorporating brands and virtual worlds and in free roams and some of our other games. We're trying to figure out now how to get real retailers incorporated into the world. So, for example, we've got a spy-themed MMO called The Agency coming out this next year, and we're using real-world cities like Prague. It'd be awesome to have an Amazon storefront there, and people could walk in, they could buy real-world CDs and have them sent to us because we can transact. We can do e-commerce.
It's the next evolution of the internet because as borders move to internet moves to virtual world, and it just seems like.
And I think PlayStation's doing some interesting stuff with the Home Initiative as well.
Are you seeing businesses come to you guys as kind of leaders in this space and saying, how can I take my business?
No, not really. It's more us trying to pitch them on how we can integrate them into our game.
Second Life's had a little of that. You know, some
Yeah.
big businesses doing video conferencing experiences inside the world. But I think that I heard somebody from Sun Microsystems, our chief gaming officer, make the argument that actually, so the hot topic these days is that everything will eventually be the 3D web, right? That's certainly the prediction out in Silicon Valley. But you made this argument that actually, depending on the activity, you'd have some activities should be in a different format, right? Meaning, like, looking for books, Amazon's a pretty darn good model. You know, the alternative, like a 3D space that you walk through and you look across the books and find the right book and pull it off the shelf, it's more realistic, but that doesn't mean it's better. You know, walking across a 3D space to get from one city to the other sucks. We do it in the real world because we can't teleport. But if we could, right? But if we could, we do that. So, you know, there's actual, I don't know, I just think that it depends on what the activity is. Our world, parts of us are of our site is HTML. You know, parts of it are a Flash virtual space you're in.
But we do this again and again. It's always, you know, this is going to replace that, and video never did kill the radio star. You know, I mean,
Right.
One thing builds on top of, on the shoulders of the next, and evolves and grows out of it, but doesn't fundamentally replace it. It's just an additive experience.
And there are some platforms that actually do specialize in that right now. Just off the top of my head, Quack, which is a virtual world or 3D platform that's exclusively in a business-to-business. And I happen to know those guys, and actually since the day they've launched, they've been profitable. And they work with, you know, HP and other advanced corporations where they want to get into a room where, you know, you're not just putting images on a wall, but you're actually putting a shared spreadsheet or some shared content and getting people in there for meeting scenarios. So there are solutions like that. Yes, sir. Who?
People taking these worlds so seriously that there are political systems evolving, or is it really just an online hangout where?
These are totally serious, but it depends on. So better put, it depends on the person and it depends on the world. So ours happens to be a relatively complex, teen-oriented to 23-year-old space. So it's a little more complex than Club Penguin, which feels a heck of a lot more like a Flash game. But to give you concrete examples, I found 7 banks inside the site, including 2 that merged. We have the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under the first President Bush, Michael Boskin. He's the chairman of Gaia's Council of Economic Advisors, and we have a full-time PhD econ guy out of Stanford who just works on managing inflation issues inside our site. So that's real. You know, it's not real like that they can't eat if they don't, and it's not that real, but it feels very real.
I mean, political parties where people are sort of making decisions, and if so, what role do you guys play in terms of, you know, dictating, so to speak, what the value system is?
So that's every world decides differently. Second Life's the most intellectually stimulating and cool in this area because they decided to, in essence, make a country and allow the citizens of it to set the rules, right? And they just have made the tools of the earth and the environment, in essence. So they have that area of interest. We aren't like that. We're like Disney World. We created a storyline and a characters and a level of cleanliness and a set of, you know, rules to the experience, so it's not overwhelming and it's not confusing. And within it, there are certain things you can do. We don't let them decide the big governmental issues. But that's a cool idea.
Is that
Yeah, question. To follow on that, I've read about some online games that are geared toward promoting socially responsible behavior and values and things like that. I don't know that it's made it into the massively multiplayer world, or has it?
Socially responsible? Well, this morning in the news there was some company that got funded for a green kids world. So I think, everything's going to be tried. Any comments on that? Or I know we had one more question. There's a lady in purple here.
So this is a question for Matt, actually. I was wondering if you are looking to work with, say, harmonics to maybe leverage your virtual worlds onto the gaming area.
I was trying to answer that environmental.
Oh, please do. Answer both.
No, I don't know if literally people will create a separate thing completely dedicated to that versus trying to bring that into the worlds. It's just like if this is a simulation of life, it's like we're trying to get that started. So real world Hollywood is going to be much more. It's a greenhouse in Hollywood, very very environmentally. It's going to be definitely environmentally focused kids in there. So we've got a huge thing going with it's basically building an environmental skill ladder. So the more kind of environmentally safe stuff you do and the more recycling you do with all those Pepsi cans that you're buying, you can kind of level up in that thing. And I'm just wondering if that's a better model versus literally a game that's designed around, so because the question is always, how do you make it fun? And as far as harmonics, I mean, I don't know. To me, what's really interesting about those between them and we, I think it's fundamentally showing that there's a completely different set of rules operating in gaming these days. And to me, even though I'm a hardcore gamer, it's like this is saying it's gaming for the rest of us. There's a lot more to human beings and human society than mastery and dominance, war games, and sports games. And the opening up a fantasy that says I can be a rock star versus I can be the leader of a guild that's killing the other tribe, is an interesting idea. How many other fantasies out there is some smart person like Harmonix going to figure out and tap into? And then the Wii is just, who would have said at E3, 4 years ago that the Wii would basically kick it? Sorry, E3 was great too, but that they would be the #1 selling, console in the season last year. I just think it's as far as Harmonix goes, they're part of the company now, and we're really interested in obviously since we're MTV, the whole space of letting people really interact with music on a whole nother level. So I think you can expect to see some interesting things down the line.
Great. We'll take one last question from that gentleman there.
Do you guys see virtual worlds playing a, say, non-fantasy role where, say, corporate meetings start to become virtual worlds or more functional purposes or day-to-day interactions? So what do you think will lead that? I know there's no content and entertainment and that sort of thing, although I think there could be in some sense.
So I think you asked a question similar to that before. So concrete, real story is that in Second Life, there are corporations. It's more European. It's a much more European phenomenon than the U.S. Part of the reason people don't buy into the Second Life phenomenon here as much. It's growing quite quickly in Europe. People are using it for conferencing and meetings and interviews for jobs and stuff. It's real. It's totally real. They're doing $5 million a month in sales and $480 million last year in GDP inside their space, and a lot of it's corporate stuff. So
there's a lot of interesting thinking going on around telecommuting and kind of globalization of business. People don't spend time with their colleagues like they used to, which is a good thing in a lot of ways, but it hurts culture, and it's very difficult to inculcate culture into people when they're brought into a company where they never meet their coworkers because they work remotely. So I've seen some really interesting work being done with companies saying it's really hard getting our people together in the same room, and this might be a way for us to actually continue the interplay between our workers, continue our culture, develop our culture, inculcate new people with our culture, and we've spent a lot of money and a lot of time developing a culture that attracts people and keeps people in our company. It goes away if they don't spend time with one another. And this might be a way to kind of let them get together and be together, although they're obviously really not. So that'll be, I think, a place where it will succeed with the enterprise.
Great. And on that note, let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much.